We are continuing in a series called Rewrite the Story, and we're talking about the redemptive nature and character of our God and how He's big into rewriting stories. Last week we talked about how beneficial it is for us to have a God that's into restoration and chooses to forgive us. And this week, we're going to move into a 2-week block talking about the expectations of a God who puts such a high value on forgiveness. And so naturally, He expects to see you and I live out that value as well. That's where the nature of God's character can be a little harder for us to enjoy. I want to take a moment and stroll down memory lane with you to a day, a simpler time, the good old days, right? My kids are at an age now where they're wanting a little more freedom, a little more exploration, getting a little further from the house into the neighborhood. And I'll say things like, don't go too far, or don't forget to charge your gizmo watch. Now, when I was growing up, that wasn't a thing. Nobody ever said, don't forget to take your watch with you when we left. We just woke up in the morning and we left and we got on our bikes and we took off, and we didn't really even have a plan. We just rode, and we were all over the city, and we were all throughout the woods where now all these houses are here in Brunswick. We were in the woods, and we would build ramps, and we would try to light fires. You know, things that kids do, right? I mean, don't sit there and act like you didn't ride your bike everywhere when you were a kid, and you didn't even think about coming home until the streetlights were on. And if you wanted to know where everybody was, you looked for the pile of bikes at that house, and you knew that's where all the kids were. Things were easy back then, man, but we've learned a lot, right? And so we've got some new practices that we've put into play that maybe we don't like them so much, but they're certainly good for us. Like bike helmets, right? Like we never wore a helmet. We'd be jumping things, man. Like we actually jumped off of things that if I saw my kids do it, I mean, I don't even know, right? But we wouldn't wear a helmet. That was absurd. You know, we just rode our bikes. We got on our bikes and we took off. How about seat belts, right? Seat belts, they kind of made a law that you have to wear them. How many of you love that law, okay? I'll answer it. Not many, because otherwise they wouldn't have to put the beeper on and ding, 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 ding until you put it on. Like, not many people love the restriction of the seatbelt. But I think we can agree that it's a good thing, right? Quick story. When I was like 6 or 7. See, you guys have kids my age, right? Yeah, you get 6, 7. When I was about 6 or 7 years old, I remember we were coming home from church one time. And I had started to fall asleep leaning against the door of the station wagon. And church will do that to you, it'll put you to sleep. But I'm leaning against the door, and all of a sudden the door flies open. And I'm like dangling out the side for what felt like a city block, okay? And I'm just dangling. And then somebody reached back and kind of pulled me up and closed the door, and we never talked about it again. And it bothers me that happened. But I think because it was just normal. Like that was just a part of like how we did things back there. It was no big deal. So I don't even think my family would validate that story for me. I don't think anybody talks about it. Seat belts, bike helmets, they're really a pain sometimes, right? They could be uncomfortable. They can certainly take away from the coolness factor, depending on what your helmet looks like. But they serve a real purpose, a purpose that's for your own good. Seatbelts really do save lives. Bike helmets save people from serious injuries. And this type of stuff, right, things that we don't really like to do, but we know is good for us, it really applies to our material today about forgiveness. Doing the work to decide to forgive someone. It's not always easy. It's much easier to hold a grudge, right? Or to fantasize about how we'll get back at them. But there are very real physical, mental, and spiritual benefits to forgiving people who have wronged us. How many of you remember the good cough syrup? You know, it was like 80 proof. It tasted like gasoline. It is an absolute truth that the best medicines always taste the worst, isn't it? Offering forgiveness may not taste good, but it's medicinal to us when offered. Plus, if we're going to become more like Jesus, who died on a cross for our forgiveness, then it seems obvious that we should seek to become generous and sacrificial in how we offer forgiveness as well. Throughout the Old Testament scriptures, they foretold of the coming of a time where there would be deep community among the believers. And Jesus ultimately came to lay out the principles of living that kind of lifestyle, a kind of community that would bless and enrich one another, and then through them, where Jesus would bless and enrich the world. Forgiveness is a cornerstone habit of his vision for that. Here at Polaris, you'll hear us reference friendship with Jesus, and that it's expressed ultimately through three avenues or three expressions: the treasure, the table, and the towel. Treasure being our actual friendship and growth with Jesus. He said that lifestyle that he set before us is like a treasure worth leaving everything for. We have the table, the picture of the table where believers can get around a table and dine together and meet and have community. And then the towel, which represents our servanthood, that Jesus used as he washed and dried feet of his disciples the night before his betrayal. The concept of forgiveness fits very well within the treasure of Jesus' lifestyle. The ways of the life that Jesus teaches are treasure to us to discover. And forgiveness, when found, produces great value in the pursuit of spiritual and even physical health. Jesus taught us the importance of forgiveness 2,000 plus years ago, long before any medical journals. But today, scientists are discovering the treasure of forgiveness that have been there all along. Researchers are discovering that forgiveness is far more than just a spiritual habit. It actually heals the body. People who practice forgiveness show lower blood pressure, slower heart rate, and less stress on the cardiovascular system. Some of us are going to forgiveness instead of the gym. I'm going to start doing forgiveness. One study even found that people with early hypertension who went through an 8-week forgiveness training saw real drops in both their anger and their blood pressure. It doesn't stop there. Forgiveness strengthens the immune system. It lowers inflammation. It reduces the stress hormones that wear us down. Holding grudges, on the other hand, keeps the body in a state of tension. But letting go allows the body to rest, reset, and heal. And the ripple effects are everywhere. Better mental health, less depression and anxiety, more hope, stronger self-esteem. Forgiving-natured people even sleep better. They report less pain and enjoy more overall health. Now, you'll find all that in your My chart, okay? Jesus was right. Forgiveness is a treasure, both when received and when doled out. It has healing effects spiritually and even physically. So if you've been waiting until you feel good about a situation to forgive someone, remember, we don't heal in order to forgive, but we forgive in order to begin the healing. While there are obvious and scientific factors regarding the physical benefits of forgiveness, Jesus obviously teaches a little bit more about the spiritual side of their benefits. So if you're taking notes, here's the first principle we want you to know about forgiveness. Biblically, it says that forgiveness is reciprocal. Here's the most plain and simple way Jesus stated a spiritual promise. I'm going to read it to you, and I want you to ask yourself a simple question. If I believe that what Jesus is saying to be true, how will I live my life going forward? So in Luke 6, Jesus says this: "Do not judge, and you will not be judged. Do not condemn, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Give, and it will be given to you. A good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over, will be poured into your lap. For with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. What if Jesus meant that? What if it were spiritually true? You will be judged, condemned, and forgiven using the same standards that you use for others. If that were entirely true, would you be judging anyone? Would you be holding a grudge against anyone? Would you need to be forgiving someone? Jesus said that. And the Gospels have various ways of explaining that. So we know it's something that Jesus taught in various forms. Jesus said that our mercy toward other people is reciprocal. It comes back to us from God in the manner in which we dole it out. It's worth reading again. Do not judge, and you will not be judged. Do not condemn, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Give, and it will be given to you. A good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over will be poured into your lap. For with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. So in some way, somehow, the way we forgive others comes back to us from God. Look at the language that's used there. A good measure, pressed down, shaken together. Do you know what it makes me think of? A fresh bag of potato chips. You ever go to the store? You get that salty treat. Nice big party size bag. And you get home and you hide from your kids. And you open it and it looks like somebody ate half the bag. Right? It doesn't seem like it was pressed down, shaken down. It looks like it was inflated. It looks like it was empty, hollow. But the kind of forgiveness we should offer is more like the bucket of popcorn at the movie theater. You know, you get the guy, he puts the popcorn, and you go, hold on, butter, please. Shake that thing, man. More butter, right? Layer it up, shake it down. Before you get the salt, you pound it on the table. It's pressed down, it's shaken together. You want to make sure that it is completely full. That's the kind of forgiveness we should offer. Not the hollowed out, empty, visual representation of a party-sized bag of chips, but that extra large, buttered, layered popcorn that you enjoy at the movie theater. I know when I stand before God someday, I'm going to hope that He's layered it up, that He's shaken it down. And so I need to be like that in my forgiveness. Let's incorporate the idea of forgiveness into the table. Okay? This idea of the table are deep relationships. Whenever we talk about building deep friendships here at Polaris, we're talking about the table of community. That's the kind of community that's going to require a commitment to forgiveness. Because we're broken, we're selfish, we're careless. We don't always think about how our words will impact other people first. If we cannot show each other mercy, we'll never experience the benefits of deep connection with one another. It's a requirement. How many of you have had to forgive your parents for something? Or how many of you have had to forgive your children of something? Maybe you have friends where you've had to offer them forgiveness. Husbands, wives, maybe you've had to offer forgiveness to your husbands. Husbands, it doesn't count for us. You just shut up. You keep your mouth shut. Carry on. We're going to see in just a minute here that forgiveness doesn't necessarily mean forgetting or restoring. And we'll walk through what it means and what it doesn't mean. I'm just saying, if we're going to ever experience the kind of table community that Jesus meant to bring, we're going to have to commit to being merciful to one another, to being okay with a messy type of grace. Here's a couple more scriptures that'll remind us of the mindset it's going to take. In Matthew 18, one of Jesus' disciples, Peter, came to Jesus and asked, "Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother or sister who sins against me? Up to 7 times?" Jesus answered, "I tell you, not 7 times, but 77 times." Peter was kind of being like my kids. How many times do I got to take the garbage out? Like always, dude. Every week, all the time. Yet Peter thought he was being reasonable, offering up 7 as like a solid number to forgive somebody. And Jesus multiplies that by 70. He's saying it's going to have to be habitual and intentional. Now, I don't believe that Jesus literally meant 490 times, because if he did, I know I would be keeping receipts. Like, you're running out of chances, buddy. You know? And I know that I would be running out of chances myself if 490 were the limit. But we could speculate on the 2 numbers a little bit if you want to. Like, the number 7 represents completion in the Bible. And the number 70 is the amount of weeks from start to finish in the book of Daniel, where it's all of time. And so I like to think when I hear Jesus say you must forgive 70 times 7, I think he's saying always until the end, until it's complete. Forgive habitually, intentionally, and without ceasing until it's finished. That's what Jesus did. He forgave all the way up to his dying breath. And then he said, "It is finished." Besides, it might take us a few times to forgive the same offense, the same person. Resentments might start to bubble up even after you've offered that forgiveness. And so you have to practice forgiveness. And that practice of forgiveness can be strengthened just like anything else by repetition. So speaking of repetitive forgiveness, here's another way to frame it up. Forgive as you have been forgiven. Paul writes in Colossians, "Bear with each other and forgive one another. If any of you has a grievance against someone, forgive as the Lord forgave you." That's the best mindset. First, we forgive because God has forgiven us. Second, we forgive because Jesus says to do it. And third, we forgive because God is always willing to forgive us first. So what does it mean to forgive biblically? What is the meaning of it? Let's take a few minutes and talk about that, what it is and what it's not. Let's talk about the Judas factor for a minute. If you don't know who Judas was, he was one of the 12 disciples, one of Jesus' closest followers, who ultimately had him handed over to be crucified. He betrayed him. He was a traitor. We can assume that the gospel writers, the ones that wrote Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, were living out the teachings of Jesus as they wrote this biography of their teacher. Let's at least assume that the gospels are honoring the commands of Jesus in their narratives. And let's take a look. One of those days, Jesus went out to a mountainside to pray and spent the night praying to God. When morning came, he called his disciples to him and chose 12 of them, whom he also designated apostles. Simon, who he named Peter, his brother Andrew, James, John, Philip, Bartholomew, Matthew, Thomas, James, son of Alphaeus, Simon, who was called the Zealot, Judas, son of James, and Judas Iscariot, who became a traitor. They didn't forget about that. They wrote this after it all happened, decades even after Jesus' public ministry. But every single gospel writer goes out of their way to mention Judas as the betrayer of Jesus. You can almost see their physical, facial expressions as they write, that Judas, that betrayer. They had a hard time forgetting that. So I don't believe that forgiveness necessarily means forgetfulness. Let's take a look at the book of Acts, another scripture here, where the church leaders are looking to replace Judas after his suicide. Acts chapter 1, it says, "Then they prayed." So they're praying here. This is kind of wild. "Lord, you know everyone's heart. Show us which of these two you have chosen to take over the apostolic ministry, which Judas left to go where he belongs. Yo, ouch, man. Have you ever been around someone when they shoot a dart while they're praying? I think it's safe to say that forgiveness doesn't always mean forgetting completely. Judas is someone who hurt Jesus, and it seems that the authors of the gospel did not forget that. It's one way we can assume forgiveness is not forgetfulness. Now let's take a look at an inner church interaction. And this is about a person named John Mark. He wrote the Gospel of Mark, and he had two names like Ricky Bobby. Now look at Acts 15. There were 4 missionaries, okay? These are 4 people who were sent to set up churches and preach and bring Jesus' kingdom here to the earth. They were named Paul, Barnabas, Silas, and John Mark. Barnabas wanted to take John, also called Mark, with them, but Paul didn't think it was wise to take him because he had deserted them in Pamphylia and had not continued with them in the work. They had such a sharp disagreement that they parted company. Barnabas took Mark and sailed for Cyprus, but Paul chose Silas and left. So the 4 of these missionaries, they split. They're out doing Jesus' work, and they have these moments of contention and disagreement. And so I think it's safe to say that Acts is not writing all this down to highlight a sin that's happening. It doesn't seem like they're doing anything outside of Jesus' teachings, but it does show us that forgiveness doesn't always mean reconciliation. Sometimes our differences are going to create enough awkwardness that it doesn't make sense for complete restoration. And what about divisive behavior? Forgiveness also doesn't mean that you tolerate ongoing inappropriate behavior. And Paul writes this in Titus 3, warn a divisive person once, and then warn them a second time. After that, have nothing to do with them. You may be sure that such people are warped and sinful. They are self-condemned. They don't even get 3 strikes. They're not even using baseball rules here. You get 2. You show some grace to a repeat offender, but you don't have to tolerate continual problems under the banner of continual forgiveness. So in summary, forgiveness is not forgetting what was done to you. Forgiveness is not reconciliation with those who have hurt you. Forgiveness is not tolerance. So what is it? It's a choice. It's a decision to give up your own pursuit of justice and fairness, trading it in for a new pursuit of equity through a growing friendship and a deepening trust in Jesus, who is ultimately in control and who is equitable and who will bring justice. So we're going to close with the following, and I'll have the band come back up to close us out. Your complete healing cannot begin until you forgive. Forgiveness is not a feeling. It's a choice. It's a decision of your will. And since Jesus commands us to forgive, we can be sure it's something God will help us do. It's hard. Everything inside of us cries out for revenge, for fairness, that the other person might pay for what they've done. But Scripture says, do not take revenge. Leave room for God's wrath. And Alex will talk more about that part next week. But in other words, let them off your hook. Because as long as you refuse to forgive, you're still chained to that hurt. Forgiveness doesn't mean they're off of God's hook. It just means that you trust God to deal with them justly and fairly. Forgiveness is more about what's good for you. It has little to do with the other person. And God wants to forgive first and foremost for your own good. Forgiveness is a seatbelt. It's a bike helmet. It's the good medicine. It doesn't always feel good, doesn't always look good or taste good, but it's something you put into practice for your own good. So this week, practical takeaway, take some time to sit in silence with God. And ask him to bring to your mind everyone that's ever hurt you that you've yet to forgive. And you're probably going to be surprised what bubbles up. You can start with the elementary school playground. You can work through family gatherings, and it's going to be painful. But most surgery is. And then one by one, tell God that you choose to forgive them. You're letting them off your hook. And you know that God is a God of justice. You're done carrying around a weight that you were never meant to carry. Now, it might take multiple sessions, many prayers. It might take conversations with trusted friends and advisors and pastors, and we're here for you for that. But the freedom and treasure that forgiveness brings is so much better than the pain and distress of living with grudges. It's a treasure worth digging for.